Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
I found a kid who swings a golf club like a dream. I'd like to try to qualify him for the U.S. Amateurs.
Coming to Apple TV Plus.
What's your name?
I'm not into older guys, but I'm flattered.
A new comedy series, Stick.
I don't want to go on this trip.
Your mouth's saying one thing, but those eyes are saying something else.
From the home of Ted Lasso.
This is your shot at redemption? This is your mulligan?
Owen Wilson.
This game takes and it takes. The game's finally giving me something back.
Stick.
You know Arnold Palmer?
Iced tea, lemonade, mix it.
I'm missing a nap for this.
Streaming June 4th on Apple TV Plus.
Oh, please, Gavin. If China wanted to spy on you, they just have a kid with a kite stand on Glastonbury. Yes.
The following podcast contains
Don't you cuss on this here radio.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you just gave your kid, like, the worst thing possible, a balloon, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe. This is episode number 396, Balloons, Menace from Above, where we talk about the most dangerous, diabolical, and damaging thing you can imagine, balloons. Stay tuned.
The What the Hell Are You Thinking podcast is brought to you by Helium, first in the noble gas group in the periodic table. Helium wants you to know that it is so much more than balloon filler and a way to make your voice sound funny. Helium is also the second lightest and second most abundant element in the observable universe, and after hydrogen. And helium has never blown up a blimp. The most common isotope of helium in the universe is helium-4, the vast majority of which was formed during the Big Bang. Large amounts of new helium are created by nuclear fusion of hydrogen in stars. Helium is star stuff, and you're putting in a rubber shell for your kids. Helium is vital in medical imaging, search and rescue operations, space exploration, metal alloys, nuclear safety, and fucking lasers. And you use helium to float a fucking cartoon in your parades. Helium is finite on Earth, hard to reproduce, and getting rarer every day. So put some respect on helium and stop using helium to make your voice sound funny.
Super balloon. It's about 10 feet long and made of a plastic film that's strong. To inflate, run into the wind and then pop. The rubber band goes on when it's filled enough. You can throw it, rebound it. You can kick, spin, or pound it. You can play with some friends, have a big laugh, or make a giraffe. Super balloon. Each sold separately from Whammo.
My parents never went in for things like birthday parties for the kids. I mean, we got presents and cake and shit.
That's the most important part.
But the whole make invitations and have a bunch of fucking 8-year-olds running screaming around for a couple of hours trashing the place.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, I think I had one birthday party as a kid, but it was at my grandparents' place and really just my cousins who honestly would have been there anyway, so it was really just cake and presents like always. But it wasn't my parents that didn't love me, it's just that they weren't party people. That's never to say I never went to a birthday party. Though now that I do think of it, the only ones that I ever went to were my cousins, and they were at my grandparents' house.
I had no idea you had so few friends.
I had friends, it's just that their family didn't have party money either. It was tough in those days. Honestly, even if I were invited to parties,
Which, again, I thought you were not.
I wouldn't have enjoyed them because let's face it, kids' parties fucking suck. Tacky decorations, a bunch of dumb games, and there was never any booze.
We're talking about children.
They could have stuck to beer. I understand you're not going to front top shelf whiskey for a group of 10-year-olds. You could have bought some Bud Light or something. Those are like barely alcoholic. But what children's parties did have were fucking clowns doing shit with balloons. Swampo the clown, who was paid $50 by some divorced dad named Bob to keep the peace with his ex, is going to show up and twist some dick-shaped rubber things into things that are supposed to look like animals, but only look like dick-shaped things twisted into bigger dick-shaped things. It's not entertaining, Bob. You wasted your money on Swampo, who frankly smells like he's been eyeballs and gin all fucking morning and is staggering around slurring, "Hey, kids, You want Swampo to show you a magic tricks? And then 30 minutes later, Swampo spotted taking a piss on a potted plant beside the garage. Save your money, bub. No one ever thinks clowns or balloon animals are funny. They think they're creepy, and the sound balloons makes when they rub against each other is like corpse nails on a fucking chalkboard gravestone. Send Swampo back to the bar where you found it, bub. We're done here. But I'm not here to talk about children's parties or clowns. I'm here talk about balloons. Because balloons have been in the news lately, but by the time this comes out, the world will be on to something else because it has the attention span of a gnat.
Well, now to that suspected Chinese spy balloon that raised tensions between the U.S. and China and between Democrats and Republicans. The Air Force fighter jet, or rather an Air Force fighter jet, shot down the balloon off the South Carolina coast on Saturday. This morning, China said the U.S. hyped up the incident on purpose. The U.S. says the balloon flight was a clear violation of international law.
Now, look, we're not doing a current affairs podcast because we did that for a long time, and I hated it.
So did everyone else.
And I don't give a shit about the balloon. It's the latest, oh, look, a squirrel, in our national attention deficit disorder. What I do care about is content. And the balloon gives me a chance to clear some smaller topics that I've had on my show sheet hopper that were never quite enough to make a full episode out of, but if I mash them together with a vaguely topical news story, I have content. So, without further ado, I present to you Balloons, Menace from Above. We begin on June 14th, 1947. And rancher W.W. Mac Brazel and his son Vernon were driving across the scrubby desert on their ranch when they spotted something bizarre. According to Brazel, it was, quote, a large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tinfoil, and rather tough paper and sticks. You know, like a balloon. Now, Mac Brazel was not a worldly man, nor was he a learned man. He was a sheep herder in one of the shittiest parts of New Mexico, right outside of a nowhere town 100 miles from nowhere called
Roswell, New Mexico, yeah.
Mac didn't know what it was, where it was from, or who it might belong to. So he loaded up some of this junk in his pickup truck and drove it into Roswell and dumped it off with the sheriff, George Wilcox, and George was like,
"This is a pile of junk."
And Mac was all like, "Yup." Not knowing what else to do, old Sheriff George called up the nearest military base where he told base commander Colonel Butch Blanchard,
all the characters are such wonderful names,
who called his boss, General Roger W. Ramey, and asked him what the hell to do with this truck full of junk. Ramey said to collect it all up and bring it back to the base, so Butch Blanchard sent out his intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, out to Mac's place, where they collected up all the junk and hauled it back to Roswell Army Airfield. Back at the base, Blanchard and Marcel took a look at this pile of junk and knew exactly what it was because it was
a secret!
And to cover their tracks, Marcel was told to say something to the local newspaper. Guess there wasn't a lot of news happening in Roswell in those days. And what Marcel told the local newspaper was that what Mac and Vernon had found out on their ranch was a flying saucer. And the paper was like, cool. And then ran the headline, quote, Roswell Army Air Force captures flying saucer and ranch in Roswell, unquote. Upon reading the paper, Colonel Blanchard had some issues with Marcel's cover story.
What the hell were you thinking?
Jesse was like, but you said not to say what it really was. And the general was like, well, I didn't tell you to say that. And Jesse was like, but the secret. And the general was like, you can tell them that it was a weather balloon, you dipshit, and ordered Marcel to issue a correction. Now that must have been a fun phone call. Hey, it's Jesse. Look, I think there might have been some misunderstandings about what I said yesterday. No. I didn't say flying saucer. I said crying softer. Must have had a bad connection. Why would I say crying softer? Well, you see, I was sad because my favorite weather balloon had crashed. Yeah, weather balloon. My favorite one. It was really emotional for me. And that... No, I'm serious. It was definitely a weather balloon. Not any other kind of balloon we might have or use, just a regular old weather balloon. No, I'm not saying weather balloon strangely. Why would I say that? It's just a regular weather balloon that I was very fond of, and definitely not a flying saucer or any other kind of secret program that we don't want to talk about. There's no secret program that I don't want to talk. It's just a regular weather balloon. Just, look, you're going to just need to print a clarification, okay? It's a matter of national security. Well, I can't tell you why it's a matter of national security because then you would know and I would have to kill you. Okay, thanks for taking the call. Make sure you run that by. What Major Marcel could not talk about was something called Project Mogul, which was all about
balloons.
Quoting now from Smithsonian Magazine, quote, what was really going on was something called Project Mogul. In this classified program, the U.S. government launched high-altitude balloons into the ionosphere, hoping to monitor Russian nuclear tests. The Russians wouldn't get a nuclear weapon until 1949, but in 1947, we did not know that. It was conducted out of Washington, D.C. and Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, with some high-altitude balloon launches taking place in the high desert near the state's border with Texas. Typically, a Project Mogul balloon sent into high altitude stretched 657 feet from tip to tail, 102 feet taller than the Washington Monument, and twice as tall as the Statue of Liberty. As the balloons rode the upper jet stream towards Russia, the long tail, equipped with different types of sensing and listening device, trailed behind. But obviously, something happened to this one balloon. It came back to Earth and was probably spread across a wide area, unquote. Mind you, the government didn't bother to tell us this until 2017, leaving the story to churn through the UFO community for 50 years. Now that the program has been declassified, the documents released, and everything has been cleared up, people are fine with it. No, you know better than that. Everyone who believes it was a flying saucer just shouts,
I don't believe a word you're saying.
And goes right on believing it was a flying saucer. Personally, I do believe it was a spy balloon because only the United States military would be so stupid as to tell the public they had a flying saucer to cover up a stupid spy balloon program that no one would have given a shit about or thought about twice if they'd known the truth at the time. Now, sometimes the balloon threat is a manned threat. On July 2nd, 1982, an unidentified flying object was spotted at 16,000 feet above San Pedro, California, moving into the controlled space of Long Beach Airport. The call came in to authorities via CB radio from a group called REACT for a Radio Emergency Associated Communications teams who monitored CB Channel 9 for emergency calls. The REACT team reported to the local police and the Long Beach Airport that there was something in the airspace and they needed to divert or delay incoming and outgoing flights. The police and the airport naturally had questions.
What is it exactly?
What it was exactly was Larry.
Who is Larry?
Quite simply, Larry was a man with a dream. I'm quoting now from DarwinAwards.com. Quote, Larry Walters of Los Angeles, California is one of the few to contend with the Darwin Award and live to tell the tale. Larry's boyhood dream was to fly, but fates conspired to keep him from his dream. He joined the Air Force, but his poor eyesight disqualified from a job as a pilot. After he was discharged from the military, he sat in his backyard watching jets fly overhead. He hatched his weather balloon scheme while sitting outside in his extremely comfortable Sears lawn chair. He purchased 45 weather balloons from an Army-Navy surplus store, tied them to his tethered lawn chair dubbed Inspiration 1, and filled the 8-foot diameter balloons with helium. Then, armed with some sandwiches, Miller Lite, and a pellet gun, he strapped himself into his lawn chair. He figured he would shoot to pop a few of the mini balloons when it was time to descend. Larry planned to sever the anchor and lazily float to a height of 30 feet above the backyard, where he would enjoy a few hours of flight before coming back down. But things did not work out quite as Larry had planned, unquote. Larry's dream was to fly, not to be good at math, so he wildly miscalculated the lift of 45 8-foot diameter weather balloons, and Inspiration 1 took off like a rocket, hauling Larry 16,000 feet into the air.
Oops.
Now, Larry had also failed to take into account many other variables like prevailing winds and Probably the most important would be
some kind of like rope device.
That's not fair. Larry had a rope, tested the 500 pounds. It's just that because he didn't do the math, let's just say redundancy would have worked better for him. Now, Larry began drifting away from his launch pad in the direction of Long Beach Airport, whom, by the time that the calls came in, were well aware of Larry because Larry had been spotted. This is Larry himself speaking to David Letterman.
What happened when you contacted the Los Angeles International Airport, or your friend on the ground contacted?
Okay, my friend, first of all, when he told him, he says, "You're not going to believe this, but there's a guy up there in a lawn chair with 43 balloons." And, oh, really? And we got this on tape and audio, but he said, "You're not going to believe." Everyone was panicking because this was totally unexpected, the cable snapping.
You were actually also seen by other aircraft,
I was spotted evidently by Delta and a TDWA flight at 16,000 feet.
16,000 feet. This is truly amazing. And
Larry drifted along in his lawn chair, communicating with his ground crew by CB radio. And credit where credit is due, Larry was cool and collected. Indeed, he was enjoying himself enormously. The entire Letterman interview is linked in the show notes, and Larry seems like a really great guy. As much as he was enjoying it, Larry felt he should probably end this flight, so he removed his trusty pellet gun and began to shoot his balloons. Carefully, one at a time, so that he would not unbalance the load and descend abruptly. This was working great until Larry dropped the pellet gun.
Oh, Larry.
Still, it was sufficient, and Larry slowly began to descend towards the ground, where he promptly crashed into power lines, causing a blackout in the neighborhood.
Jesus Christ, Larry.
Nevertheless, Larry was able to safely extricate himself from the power lines and walked away unharmed. As you might imagine, this kind of thing was not taken lightly by the authorities. The Federal Aviation Administration's Regional Safety Inspector, Neil Savoy, said of the incident, quote, "We know he broke some kind of part of the Federal Aviation Act, and as soon as we decide which part it is, some type of charge will be filed. If he had a pilot's license, we'd suspend that, but he doesn't," unquote. According to Wikipedia, quote, Walters was initially fined $4,000 for violation under the U.S. Federal Aviation regulations, including operating an aircraft within an airport traffic area without establishing and maintaining two-way communications with the control tower. Walters appealed, and the fine was reduced to $1,500. A charge of operating a civil aircraft for which there is not currently in effect an airworthiness certificate was dropped, as it wasn't applicable to his class of aircraft, which was, after all, a lawn chair with some balloons tied to it. Walters spoke to the press saying, "It was just something I had to do. I had this dream for 20 years, and if I hadn't done it, I think I might have ended up in the funny farm," unquote. Unfortunately, it might have been better if Larry had never taken that flight and had gone to the funny farm, because 10 years later, he committed suicide by shooting himself in the head.
Way to kill the mood.
So as you can see, the balloon menace takes many forms. But you know what? None is more terrifying than their ability to swarm.
Millions of them.
Spreading into the sky, blotting out the sun, swooping above like a great flock of birds, drifting pell-mell on the breeze under no one's control.
Aren't you being a little overly dramatic?
You think so? You think so? It's happened before. The consequences were devastating because people died. September 27th, 1986, 1:50 p.m., Public Square, Cleveland, Ohio.
A decision that will live in infamy.
I speak of nothing other than Balloon Fest 86. Oh, it started innocently enough, as such things so often do, with the dreams of children. It was all for charity, you see. The United Way, to be specific, children sold balloons for $2 for 2 balloons, with the proceeds going to the United Way, then those balloons would be, according to the organizer Balloon Art by Treb, gathered together, filled with helium, and launched into the sky in the largest balloon launch in history.
You poor simple fools.
Quoting from Wikipedia, quote, a rectangular structure the size of a city block was set up to hold the balloons on the southwest quadrant of Cleveland's public square. It measured 250 feet by 150 feet. It was 3 stories high and covered with a one-piece material of woven mesh, while inside 2,500 volunteers, consisting largely of high school students, spent many hours filling the balloons with helium. One described the preparations as like an assembly line nonstop. Volunteers received free t-shirts, unquote. And the t-shirts read, I participated in a giant clusterfuck and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Well, actually, the t-shirts didn't say that, but they should have. Cleveland was elated. It was a huge thing for Cleveland.
Cleveland! This is for you!
Because this was going to change how people thought about Cleveland, because what people thought about Cleveland was that it was a joke.
And not a good joke.
The most commonly associated bit of knowledge about Cleveland was the propensity of his rivers to catch on fire. And so it was that 100,000 people packed Public Square for the spectacle. The local news was on hand to record the splendor of the day.
The volunteers were pouring in all night long, and by dawn it looked like a helium mountain rising out of Public Square. Inside the balloon mountain, thousands of volunteers were working as fast as they could to keep adding to the 1.5 million needed to set a new world's record. A record that nearly escaped them when a storm late last night caused the release of several thousand balloons.
It was very hairy. My crew, who was just getting ready to turn in, had everything set for the morning, and we lost 25 of the big inflatables that you see. It took off the whole side of this fabric over here. So we had to work straight through right until the time the crew got here, and they got the bin ready.
If you've never seen footage of Balloon Fest 86, I beg you, Google it. It is so worth it. The assembly area was 3 stories high, and as it increasingly filled with multicolored balloons, it looked like a giant psychedelic bowl of Skittles floated above. And by early afternoon, the assembly building was a mass of squeaking rubber as volunteers sent more and more balloons overhead. The problem was, a storm was brewing. I mean, a literal weather event, not a metaphorical device for impending disaster, though, okay, that was true too. The official count of balloons was 1,429,643, short of the stated goal of 2 million balloons, but still, that's a lot of fucking balloons. But it was more than enough to break the world record for the world's largest balloon launch, which was an actual thing. And so the organizers, with weather incoming, decided to say, fuck it, and pull the cords and release the balloons.
And at first, the launch seemed successful.
Are you guys proud to be from Cleveland? Yeah!
Broadcasted live by Fox 8's Big Chuck and Little John.
It was unbelievable. Once they let the balloons off, it was like, oh my gosh, look.
It must be admitted that the sight of almost 1.5 million balloons being released all at once was impressive. It was like a rainbow-hued mushroom cloud rising into the sky above public squares. The onlookers cheered as the balloons wreathed around the tall buildings surrounding the site and climbed majestically into the gray skies above downtown Cleveland. Again, you gotta see the video to understand how beautiful this was. Unfortunately for everyone involved, however, it was at almost that exact same moment that the storm that threatened broke over Cleveland. Quoting now from WIVB Channel 4 in the Cleve, quote, "It was unbelievable. It was a great sight. People were cheering. Everyone was happy. But then things suddenly began to change. It was overwhelming. Balloons started boiling in the air. You thought, wow, we're going to drown in these balloons. The 1.5 million colorful balloons began plummeting back down to the ground. We drove down the shoreway, and it was like a multicolored river on the road. Motorists were running into each other, running into fences. The Burke Lakefront Airport was even more of a mess. The runway was covered with balloons. The airport and the shoreway both had to temporarily shut down, and a bulldozer was brought in to help clear up the balloons, unquote. The idea had been that the balloons would rise high up into the sky, drift off for miles, and then disintegrate, dropping harmlessly back to the earth over many miles. This, admittedly, is not a great thing for the environment.
It was the 80s.
So no one had really given any thought to things like cleanup. But the weather put that 1.5 million of balloons right back down on top of Cleveland. Quoting from Wikipedia, quote, "The descending balloons clogged the land and the waterways in northeast Ohio. In the days following, many balloons were reported washed ashore on the Canadian side of Lake Eerie, causing water pollution. Some people had misconceptions about the environmental impact of balloon releases, thinking that the balloons would reach an altitude and pop and disintegrate. Traffic collisions were also reported as the drivers swerved to avoid slow-motion blizzards of multicolored orbs or took their eyes off the road to gawk at the overhead spectacles. Motors on Cleveland Memorial Shoreway ran into fences on each other before the roadway was shut down, and another bulldozer was called in to clear away those balloons," unquote. What was worse is that self-same weather was bad enough that 2 fishermen on nearby Lake Eerie had their boat capsized and they needed rescuing. But you know what doesn't really work well in a wildly blowing wall of floating balloons? Helicopters. More from Wikipedia, quote, "Raymond Broderick and Bernard Sulzer, who had gone out on September 26, were reported missing by their families on the day of the event. Rescuers spotted their 16-foot boat anchored in west of Edgewater Park Breakwall. A Coast Guard search and rescue helicopter troop had difficulties reaching the area because of the asteroid field of balloons. A search and rescue boat tried to spot the fishermen floating in the lake, but guard officials said balloons made the water made it impossible to see whether or not anyone was in the lake. On September 29th, the Coast Guard suspended its search, and the fishermen's bodies subsequently washed ashore. The wife of one of the fishermen sued the United Way of Cleveland and the company that organized the balloon release for $3.2 million and later settled on an undisclosed amount," unquote. The fiasco resonated across the Cleveland area. Canada filed a formal protest because of the massive amount of balloon trash that washed up on their side of Lake Eerie. A Medina County horse owner sued the United Way because the rain of latex balloons spooked her prize-winning Arabian horses, though she settled out of court. The entire mess wound up costing more in settlements and cleanup costs than the event raised for the United Way, who was on the hook for the money. However, the event did make the Guinness Book of World Records and holds to this day the title for largest mass balloon release ever. But this is probably because Guinness decided never to condone or count another event of this kind again. Sadly, it didn't change the public opinion about Cleveland, which to this day retains kind of a lovable loser status among American cities, even if their rivers don't catch on fire anymore, and they finally did clean up all the balloons. Pod friends, I have presented to you incontrovertible evidence that balloons are not our friends. They're cruel and unrelenting menaces from above. I mean, I didn't even mention how the Japanese during World War II launched firebomb balloons to sail over the Pacific Ocean on the jet stream and attempt to start small and sporadic fires on the West Coast because, it's not because that wasn't scary. It's just that the B-29s loaded with tens of thousands of pounds of napalm raining on Japanese cities is objectively a lot fucking worse. But balloons are still bad. And that's why China chose such a mylar menace to mildly discomfit the United States by floating serenely overhead and taking photos and electronic surveillance of the heartland, all of which could have been done by satellites and a couple of dudes in a car with a small receiver because they could get a lot closer. But they chose the balloon because they know the balloon would strike fear into the heart of the nation. Right up until the time, that we shot it down, recovered the wreckage, and got all the intelligence off of it. And I think, like most of us, when I watched that happen, I felt the thrill of being an American once again. I felt pride in my United States Air Force that it had shot down such a cunning and clever opponent as a balloon going 30 or 40 miles an hour. And I wanted to know, like the rest of you did so very much, is there audio of it? Did it make the fart noise? We may never know, but in our hearts, we know that it did.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
That is it for our show this week. Was this a dumb topic? Yes. Was the whole balloon thing equally as dumb? Absolutely yes. But it did clear some topics off my sheets, and I knew that they were never going to carry their own episodes. I mean, Roswell could have, but if I start doing topic where I was born, this would turn into just regular old history podcasts with rather more dick jokes than necessary. Speaking of unnecessary, rate and review this show wherever you get your pods. It helps others find us, take a listen, and think that your suggestion was unnecessary and unhelpful. If you like what we're doing and want to kick us a buck for clown rental, hit us up on patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. Now, you have to do what Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits. Otherwise, he's just going to have to loiter in a nearby storm drain and offer you a balloon because,
They all flow down here.
And so for me, Dave, we could float along the stars together, you and I. Bledsoe, producer.
The world's a nicer place in my beautiful balloon. It wears a nicer face in my beautiful balloon.
Gavin, and all the fictional balloon fillers on the show, we want to say, love is waiting there in my beautiful balloon, way up in the air in my beautiful balloon. And we'll see you all next week.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Twitter at @thehell_podcast, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
What are you going to do next?
Seltzer Kings
Podcasts.